All right. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on pet chaplaincy. I'm really excited that we're here today to talk about this because I think most of the other stuff that we've done has been chaplaincy and maybe what we might call the more recognizable sectors are the ones that you know, those of us are very familiar with, and this is so new and so interesting, and we're going to have a really great conversation here today. We're also joined by Wendy, the lab's founder, and so what I'm going to do is introduce everybody, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let you all have a conversation. So I don't know what order everybody is in on your screen, but I'm going to introduce them in the order they're listed on the website, and then Wendy can take it from there. We're joined today by Dr. Rob Gierka, who is the founder and director of Pet Chaplain and the Association for Veterinary Pastoral Education. Rachel Geller, who is a cat behavior counselor and certified humane education specialist. Jennifer Ellers, who is a counselor, crisis responder, and chaplain. Kelly Drescher, who is a grief care consultant and specializes in veterinary professional grief care. And then finally, Kathleen O'Hara, who is a chaplain and crisis responder. So lots of hats being worn here and swapped back and forth, and I'm sure that we will get into some of the nitty gritty of that. And now I will turn it over to Wendy Cadge, who is the founder of the lab, to take the conversation from here.
Super. Well, thank you, Michael. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and a big thanks to our panelists for agreeing to be in this conversation with us. I was starting to mention to them before we just came live that about a year ago this time, I'm a big animal lover, and our dog was quite ill. We were at the local veterinary hospital, and my partner, who is the furthest thing you might call spiritual or religious, turned to me and said, so where are these chaplains you're always studying and talking about? This is where I need a chaplain. And I said, I know, I hear you. And interestingly, there was the office of a social worker there. It was late at night and the social worker wasn't in. So I'm really interested to hear from all of you about your work in pet chaplaincy, what it looks like, et cetera. For those of you who are listening in, you see the Q&A box at the bottom. And if you click on the box and write your questions, I will do the best I can to get through as many of your questions as possible. We're really hoping this is a kind of back and forth conversation between you, the audience, and our panelists. So to start, I wondered if each of the panelists could just say a bit about what their work in pet chaplaincy looks like for people who maybe aren't familiar with this. Rob, would you mind going first?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Wendy. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about pet chaplaincy. I started back in the late 90s with hospital chaplaincy. And after that, I come from a family of pet lovers, and I'm a pet lover. But I realized that there were no people serving this need. And so I started a nonprofit and quickly got a call from the vet school. They saw my website. This was in North Carolina State, and invited me to start a program there. So for about 2 years, I was a pet chaplain. I called myself a chaplain and did rounds. And I realized that I didn't know much about pet loss. So I decided to start a PhD, which I didn't realize at the time would take much more time than I had hoped or expected. But I learned a lot about the human-animal bond and bereavement, but most importantly, about disenfranchised grief, which is really one of the primary topics that we discuss in the class that we started. So after I graduated, I organized a training program online. That's how I met these wonderful people here. And so we talk about the topic of disenfranchised grief, why it hurts so bad, and the narrative that really we're trying to challenge here. I think it's a cultural narrative, which helps us understand why it does hurt so bad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jennifer, do you want to go next? Tell us a bit about what your work looks like these days.
Yes, I am a primarily crisis response chaplain. I serve on a chaplain team with the Salvation Army, and I do mostly disaster and crisis types of intervention and work. And now I'm one of a small group within my organizations that I work with that have also been trained specifically as pet chaplains, because disasters and crises happen not just to humans, but to all species. And they're impacted, and the people who love those animals are impacted in that way too.
And geographically, where are you located?
Right now I'm in the Chicago metro area. And my primary chaplain team that I work with is for this Midwest territory in the greater Chicago metro area. But I also serve on with some teams that do work nationally with disasters.
Super, that's really helpful. Thanks. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Geller, and my main role is as a certified cat behaviorist. And I would say that as far as pet chaplaincy goes, I work probably in 3 main situations. So the first situation might be that somebody calls me because they're having a cat behavior problem. And typically, if a behavior comes on suddenly, I will advise the person first to consult with their veterinarian, because there are many medical issues that can cause a pet to behave inappropriately. And there are times when somebody consults me for cat behavior and I say, see your vet first, let's rule out anything medical. And there is the unfortunate result that there really was something very serious going on, and we might find out that the cat had a life-threatening or terminal illness. And so my role then changes, and I'm no longer the cat behaviorist, but now I'm there to provide pastoral care and comfort for this client. Then there were times that I'd be working with a client on a long-term case. Some cat behavior problems take longer to resolve than others. And during that process, a cat may die. And so again, somebody who came to me for cat behavior counseling, I end up doing pet chaplain work. And then I would say the last scenario that I deal with is somebody had come to me a few years prior. I had worked with them. I was able to successfully resolve the problem. The person could keep their cat in their home. And then maybe 3 years later, 4 years later, I get a call or email saying, we just want to let you know that Fluffy has passed away. And they're reaching out to me because they knew I was part of keeping that cat in the home. And again, I may now step in as a pet chaplain for that family.
Mm-hmm. And where are you located, and/or do you do work remotely?
Yeah, I'm in the Boston area. I live specifically in Newton, Massachusetts. And yes, I do a lot of work via phone calls, Skype, Zoom calls, such as we're doing now, FaceTime, you name it. Any type of technology that gets, me to the person, I'll jump on.
Super, super. Kelly?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Drescher Johnson, and I work at an animal hospital, an emergency specialty clinic. It is the largest on our side of the coast. And what I do is essentially pet chaplaincy as well. We call it by another name. I'm consulting with the doctors, the families on decisions about euthanasia, about emergent critical situations. So if you think about a human hospital where someone calls a code and it's a life-threatening illness, the first responders go running to respond to it. I go running to the family and start talking to them about what's happening behind the scenes, what's coming next. I'm present for euthanasias when they need to happen. We also at our hospital offer support groups. So we have one that runs weekly, which is a rather rarity. We're also starting one that's running monthly. So we have one weekly in the evening, and we're starting up one that runs monthly during the daytime to support our larger group of people.
Mm-hmm. And which coast are you on?
Sorry, I am on the East Coast, so I am also just outside of Boston. I live west of Boston, but I serve the South Shore area.
Okay, super. And Kathleen?
Well, hi, I'm Kathleen O'Hara, and I'm talking to you from San Francisco, California, the home of the unusual. So being a pet chaplain seems to be, I'm in the right city for that. My background is in hospice work on both coasts, long-term volunteer hospice work, which evolved into other types of careers, working with disabilities and incorporating animals into therapeutic use with people with disabilities. I'm also a chaplain, and I'm affiliated with UCSF Medical Center. I'm told, the first and certainly the only agnostic identified chaplain that UCSF has had on their team. Again, an unusual job description in an unusual city. So I've been embraced for that. I am on a medical leave from my full-time work at UCSF. And during that time, I dug into my heart, and I have been creating work as a pet chaplain, which is where I want my chaplaincy to go. And as such, I am working with a local organization called Muttville, which is a senior dog rescue and has an active hospice program within its mission statement. And anywhere from 10 to 18 hospice dogs on the property at any given time. We have been kind of inventing the wheel there at Muttville with this role. And what the way that it works for me at Muttville is that I am sometimes called to interact or interface with the adoptive humans of the animals who are, perhaps in decline or are facing an imminent death or perhaps have just died. So in that sense, I work as both a crisis counselor and a chaplain. I am also now in my role of chaplain working with adoptions of the hospice animals at Muttville. So it's a very unusual situation when people walk in the door and know that they are going to adopt an animal who it has a hospice diagnosis. It still gives me goosebumps to know that there are people out there that just walk through the door and know what they are giving their hearts to, and they do it anyway. And, I live in awe of those people, and it's an honor to support them and serve them and make sure that they know that there is a presence available to them should they need it or want it. And that has seemed to have been greeted really enthusiastically by the people who are taking on these dogs, just to know that that kind of support is out there, whether they access it or not. In addition to that work, I work with the San Francisco SPCA, who have a semi-legendary pet grief support group. It's said to be maybe the first established one in the country, and it's been running for, I think, close to 30 years now. But I participate in that group on a monthly basis as a support person, as a chaplain, as a presence. I'm not the formal leader of that group, but I am an acknowledged component of that group. And that's been a tremendous both learning experience, and I have found that I have been called on as a chaplain in those ways. So being a pet chaplain in San Francisco is not really a job that exists, but it's a job that I am making piecemeal. I do get referrals, and I speak with people by referral, and it's a job for the open-hearted, I think. And
so I hear this
more open-hearted than animals. So
no. Well, and I hear in many of your comments, and I hope we can talk more about the extent to which, and my partner asked me this question again when I said we were having this conversation, about the extent to which all of you work with the humans versus work with the animals. So that I think will come up. But before we go there, I wonder if you want to say just a little bit about how some of you came to this work. I mean, just in a minute or two to provide some background, particularly people who might be thinking that they're interested in this kind of work. I hear hospice background, I hear hospital chaplain preparation. Is there more that anyone would like to say about how they came to the work? Rob, we could go back to you, I guess, and go through the line again.
Well, it's interesting. You're asking a really good question. We, in our course, one of the exercises, I guess you might say, is to write your sacred narrative. It's really, the course builds to that point. And what we've discovered, and what I discovered in my research, and I wrote up in my dissertation, was that all 16 vet techs that I interviewed for the research that I did could name one special pet as their heart pet, and it had been on average 8 years since they had lost that pet. And almost to a person, they found themselves getting very emotional and also indicating that this was the reason they're doing this. So what we like to do is get those stories. And of course, I have my own story about that. So I think to say, what got me to this was the love, the connection that I had with a pet in my past that has never left me. And, as the research mentions, the continuing bond is this new understanding that we have now about grief, and that it's not, moving on, that we stay connected. So the connection really comes out generatively as a giving back. And, I love Kathleen's point about, the heart work, that's really what this is about. So it is for sure for me as well.
Sorry, I muted myself. That's really helpful, Rob. Thank you. Rachel?
So my journey to becoming a pet chaplain probably started when I was born to a father who was a rabbi. So I grew up in the world of pastoral care, and I grew up in the world of watching many, many funerals, and in the Jewish religion, sitting Shiva and rituals and mourning and death. So as I became more involved in the animal welfare business, for lack of a better term, so I'm a cat behaviorist, but I also sit on many animal shelter boards and advisory boards, and am very involved in the world of animal welfare. And what I found through my cat behavior counseling and at animal shelters is that it almost feels like people think that they need permission or some type of acceptance to mourn the loss of their pet. And looking back at my growing up and watching my dad, when a human family member dies, in both our secular and our faith-based, we know how to approach grief. We have kind of a playbook. We know what to do. You go ahead and notify family members and friends. You have a funeral. There are condolence calls. We know we can take bereavement leave from work. And likewise, people who know us, our friends and family and our coworkers, they all know what to do too. They pay their respects. They offer messages of condolence. They send us food or cards, and maybe they make donations to a charity. So everyone knows how to respond to the loss of a human. But people don't have this playbook when it comes to losing a pet. And they don't really know what to do and where to turn. And I can even remember the first time as an adult when I lost my own cat. And I was at the animal hospital, and he needed to be euthanized. And upon leaving the room, the animal hospital gave me a choice. My lovely, first experience was, you can have your cat cremated in a group with other pets, or you can have him cremated separately and have his ashes returned to you. Now, for me, this wasn't, a decision. There was no decision that of course I would take his ashes home. But to think that upon losing a beloved family member, this is what I was greeted with, was really indicative, I think, of, on the whole, how many people view the loss of a pet. And this is what brought me to becoming a pet chaplain. This is what brought me to the program, was, I think, a combination of growing up in a pastoral world, seeing the norms we have for human death, realizing we don't have this outlet and support for pet death, and what can I do in my small world to help those people, and to, for lack of a better term, give people that permission to mourn the loss of their pets.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I do, I mentioned I do disaster response, and almost every large major scale disaster or critical incident event that I've responded to in my career, there have been situations where people were dealing with the loss of a pet, or concerns or fears about injury to their pet. And sort of, there was no formal protocols on our team of how to deal with that. And as somebody who is a pet lover, has lost pets and was open about that, people on my team would sort of, when there was an issue with someone and an animal, they would sort of look at me like, send Jennifer, you go talk to the lady who lost her pet. You go talk to the woman who can't get back to her animal because of the disaster. And so when I've been doing that for years with no formal training in it other than crisis response in general. And when a colleague of mine said, hey, I'm going through this training in a program in pet chaplaincy, I thought, oh, wow, I can go get some training to do what I've been doing for so long. But I echo what the others have said, is that most of the time, the loss of a pet or those issues regarding our animal companions are sort of not considered in the same way, or sometimes at all, that other types of losses or crisis events are. And so I'm so glad that now we're starting to see people coming forward and just officially acknowledging how important the pets are in our lives, and how important it is to support people when they're going through pain and loss of those pets.
Yeah, thank you. Kelly.
So about 10 years ago, I enrolled in seminary and got my MDiv with the full intention of being a minister. For a variety of reasons, that did not happen, and I floundered around figuring, what do I do with a Master of Divinity degree in the rest of the world? So I did a variety of odd jobs, found myself in the animal industry, and happened to get a job working as a customer service representative with an animal hospital. Chance accident led me to this, is that they needed more help at the emergency specialty hospital, and I, being an overachiever, said, sure, I'll go, I'll get some experience, I'll see what it's all about. And I did that several times. And then one day, I remember very vividly, this woman came running in, her boxer had collapsed. She was a new mom. Everybody, it was late in the evening, 7, 8 o'clock, something like that. They came in running in their pajamas, no shoes, carrying a tiny little infant, could not have been more than 8 weeks old. Everybody was taking care of the pet. And my job as a front desk person is to be there ready for the next emergency, because somebody else's pet is depending on me being ready. And this poor woman sat there crying in the lobby with no one to comfort her except her husband, who's trying to take care of an infant right now. And I thought, we can do better. We can do something about this. So when one of my colleagues relieved me, I went over and talked with her, put together a proposal, and sent it over to the hospital, and talked with the team about this, and said, I think we can do more. I think that we can offer something above and beyond, and having someone there for the humans when they don't know what's going on. And so it's a long, winding path with a lot of accidental things, but my love for pets always started bubbling up back up to the surface. My first word was the family dog's name, much to the chagrin of my parents. So it was one of those things that kept cycling around. So anybody who is out there wondering, what do I do with my degree? What do you love? Get into it. You'll find something somewhere along the way.
I'm still trying to talk on mute, sorry. Kathleen, why don't you speak to this question a little bit about how you came to this? You said a bit already, and then I'm going to turn, we've got some questions here, so I'm going to turn to the questions, and if others of you are thinking about questions, type them in the box and we'll do our best to work through them.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief so we can get to those questions. I locate the foundation of my work with animals actually in two adjacent events close to 20 years ago. I was present at the Twin Towers on September 11th, and that was my neighborhood at the time. And I did have the opportunity to work with chaplains in the Victims Assistance Program in the days and weeks following that event. And one of the experiences I had were with people, some of whom were my neighbors, you know, that I knew or didn't know, coming in and having lost their pets, either disappeared or, you know, people were not able to get home. The crisis was so unprecedented and so huge that there wasn't, you know, there wasn't really a rational approach to how to deal with anything, let alone the pets in people's lives. And I really saw that grief, and I recognized it as being equal to the grief I was seeing in people who were coming through the door who were missing a family member, who couldn't track down a family member. I really saw that it was on a par. And also what I saw was that the crisis responders, incredible, big-hearted people, were not necessarily prepared to embrace that particular grief in the face of, you know, what was, you know, such a all-encompassing and larger crisis. So that was the first awakening, that there was really a need for that. Shortly after that, through coincidence, I became a veterinary technical assistant, and in New York City as well. And through no aggressive moves on my part, somehow I became the go-to person for the euthanasias that would be performed at that hospital. And they were not frequent, and they were not, you know, done without, you know, deep caring and lots of reflection on both the families and the doctors, the medical personnel. But somehow I was the one that they asked to be in the room. And I felt incredibly honored by that. Also, of course, a little nervous at first. I had been through that with a pet of my own, but, you know, not in a clinical setting. But what I witnessed in those rooms was profound. The varying types of bonds between these humans and their animals was, I mean, it's even hard to describe as an observer. It was, you know, as holy a place to be as I can imagine.
Mhm.
So I was quite humbled and moved by that. And I've carried both of those experiences with me and carried them through my hospice work with humans and carried them into my chaplaincy hospital work. And now I feel like I've come full circle, recognizing that, you know, perhaps this all adds up to coming back to those moments, those foundational moments that instructed me that there really was a great need, and maybe not so many people who were able to respond to it. And maybe I could be one of those people. I still don't know if I really can be one of those people. I just know that I will show up when those moments happen, and, you know, hope for the best.
Thanks. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, some in the chat box. I don't think we all need to answer every question. So maybe just, I don't know, wave or something if you want to take this. But the first question came in was a really practical one, which is, are there hospitals or clinics that will cover the cost of your services, or sort of what's the back end financial piece of this? Kelly?
So my hospital does not charge for the service. I work for VCA hospitals, and if you are a client of a VCA hospital, that means even if you come to our facility and just do the euthanasia, you are our client. I am available for consultation, whether in phone or in person, but our support group is completely complimentary. And that is part of what the larger hospital is able to offer by having so many services available. When I've worked at smaller clinics, I know that that's not something that they can have on staff. So that's how that's all covered.
Do others of you want to speak to this one?
I will just say that I actually provide my pet chaplain and my cat behavior counseling services completely free of charge. And if somebody wants to make a donation in honor of the work I've done or in honor of their pet, that's what I suggest if somebody feels like they need to make some type of contribution in that way. But that goes back to my dad is a rabbi, and he did not charged to do pastoral care. So that's something that I've brought with me. And so in my particular case, I don't have fees or rates for my pastoral care and my pet chaplain work.
Okay. There's a couple of different questions that are asking about how you all attend to animals. So someone wrote in the box about, the ways in which you attend to the grief of animals. There's a woman who has 2 dogs, one of whom is quite ill with cancer, and she's concerned about attending to the grief of the other animal when the first passes. Are there things that any of you could say around these sorts of questions?
I can take that one quickly.
Go for it.
So as I can speak to cats, but I'm sure dog behaviorists would have an answer as well. But as a cat behaviorist, that is a question I get all the time: how to help a grieving cat get over the loss of her companion cat. And there are techniques that humans can do to help their cats process the grief and understand the grief and move on. And there's ways we can support that cat. And there are things that we can do to make the cat feel not so lost when she's looking around the house and sniffing and smelling and on that futile search for her companion who's no longer there. So if questions come in cat related and anybody does want to know how to help a surviving cat when the companion cat has passed away, if after this people want to get in touch with me by email through you, I'm very happy to help talk anybody through that.
Super. Awesome. Anybody else want to take this?
Well, it's not a job that you're going to get rich on, at least right now. So it's really a labor of love. And I have not even really tried to monetize it so much. I have other work that I do that supports my being able to do this work for free. That being said, it's a very interesting question about how this kind of work can be embraced, commercially. There isn't a vet office that I go into that doesn't say, wow, that's so needed. That is exactly what we need. We don't know how to pay for that. So there's a big question out there, and I think we're all sort of trailblazers in the sense that we are exploring how this work can get done, and how people can give the right time to it that it deserves. But right now, I don't see any specific openings for a pet chaplain to work full-time and support themselves with that work.
Yeah. Let's go in a different direction, because we've got a couple of questions about any support you provide for vets. So someone is asking just directly, are you able to provide spiritual support to vets? Someone else is asking specifically about what kinds of needs, if any, you see amongst veterinary students. Rob, you want to take this one?
Well, I would like to address the question of charging for the service, if that's all right. We don't charge for the training. It's an extensive eight-week program. It's a fire hose of information, well organized, and I think the folks here, you could ask them. But I don't see I don't see this as something we should charge for. I'm doing this because it's my generative way to give back. That said, however, I do realize, we need, if we're going to spend our life at something, we don't have another source of income there, that would be nice to get something for that. So we do have a plan. We're writing a book, and that book will be offered as a both training and an aid in chaplains who want to use that in a support group environment. So what we're hoping to do is to both offer chaplains a way to create support groups around the country and around the world. I mean, we've had folks from Canada and also Scotland in our class, but offer book for sale to folks who want to read about this, but also want to participate in maybe in a reading, a reading group to learn about pet loss and human-animal bond, or in a support group, or we could see other applications for that kind of thing. But so what we're trying to do is give other folks an opportunity to use that as a way to make some money, but also offer that support.
And Rob, that information you put in the chat box for people who are interested in that training, it's at petchaplain.com, is that right?
Correct. You can actually apply to the program through that website and learn more about this. Yeah.
And while you're talking, just because this question did come up, could you explain what you mean by disenfranchised grief? Someone is asking for some more information about that.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I think that's a really important question. So Kenneth Doka, I think it was in 1989, wrote an interesting article about grief, and he indicated that he felt certain kinds of grief or certain kinds of losses are not considered or acknowledged socially or considered important. And pet loss is one of them, but it's not the only one. Doka mentioned miscarriage, the loss of same gender partner, loss of someone on from capital punishment. So there are some socially, some losses that are socially not recognized, and he termed that disenfranchised. Now, in addition, to really understand why pet loss is disenfranchised, you have to understand that grief is not the same as bereavement. Those are two very different things. Grief is a psychological state, and bereavement is social status. You're considered bereaved within a social group or community when you've lost someone. And if that someone is a pet, you don't obtain that bereavement status, at least not as easily. And it's changing, but typically you do not. Or if you do, it only lasts about 2 to 3 weeks, we find. To understand disenfranchised grief, the social status of bereavement is important. So that's why I talk about anthrozoological bereavement, or the loss of the human-animal bond, and the importance of that and acknowledging that.
Thank you. Do any of you do pet funerals? And if so, could you describe anything about your process?
Ooh, I'd love to respond here. So I have not yet done that. However, I just lost a pet a little over a month ago and had a really honest conversation with my pastor about that. And next week, he and I are sitting down and developing a funeral for my pet, a memorial service. So I am actually going to be going through this process as in first person so that I can talk to more people about doing that. Is true with a lot of stuff is that we have gone through first and created pathways for the people we work with to follow and then dive off into their own pathways. So that is something I am actively working on right now.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
I've done 2 funerals for cats, and what it looks like in the ones that I've done is the person who lost the cat will give me some information about their cat, what they love so much about their cat, and then I'll incorporate that into a service. And I actually use many of the exact same blessings from my dad's rabbi manual that he used to bless and to bestow grace upon departed humans. And my dad is no longer with us. He died a long time ago, but I will say to use his rabbi's manual to do a funeral for a cat and comfort somebody else and be there is probably one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had.
Another question is popping up here, asking if you all see pet chaplaincy as different from pet therapy, which some hospitals do. And there's a related question about chaplains that serve alongside animals. And there's a person who's writing that she has a chaplain cat that she serves with and finds very supportive, especially with patients who have dementia. So I wonder if any of you want to talk to the relationship between pet chaplaincy and pet therapy, and or talk about your own work if you work with companion animals or know other chaplains who do.
I'll take a stab. Oh,
I was just going to qualify.
Yeah, I was going to take a quick stab at this one, is that the pet chaplaincy has a focus of the pet first and foremost. We're talking about pet-related issues. We're talking about how the pet is dealing with a trauma. We're talking about how a human is dealing with a pet-related trauma. When we're talking about pet therapy, the pet is being used as a vehicle towards a human-related trauma. So I think that's where the deviation lies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rachel, I think you were going to get her. Jennifer, sorry.
Yeah, we actually have there's been a long history of having dogs as crisis responders. And when I'm teaching, I often say, if you want to see crisis response done really well, especially psychological first aid, watch the dogs. They do it well. They are able to be with people and comfort them with their presence, and they don't talk too much. But Kelly is absolutely right. Pet chaplaincy is focused on the issue in regard to a loss or trauma involving an animal and how that affects both the animals and the humans. In terms of pet therapy or even crisis response, animals, dogs, that's them participating in being chaplains with us, being responders or therapists with us. So they become one of our colleagues, and animals then are working right alongside of us to respond to the hurts and needs of human beings. And they do it so well. But pet chaplaincy is different in that we're responding to the pain caused by death or injury of an animal to humans or other animals. Does that help clarify it?
It does. So
yeah, and I was going to just say what those two just said.
Same thing. Okay, yeah. Kathleen.
And I can kind of bridge those two a bit. I think I work with an outreach program with Muttville, the organization I spoke about earlier, and it's called Senior for Seniors. And what we do is we bring seniors from senior centers, many of whom have memory loss or dementia or Alzheimer's related challenges, and we bring them to the office where the dogs are, and we will bring down the hospice dogs and other dogs that might be suitable for that kind of interaction. And it's quite an incredible program, because these are mostly people who cannot have pets in the environments that they are now living in. And it works in two ways. It certainly is very therapeutic, the human-animal interaction, and we see that across ages and across abilities, how profound and magic and miraculous that can be. But I have also seen it really trigger memories for people of their own pets and their loss. And it has many times opens up a door that I can be present for these people to talk about the loss of this pet that maybe at that time they were not so encouraged to talk about. As Rob had said, the bereavement is not something that even now we endow people who've lost a pet with, but certainly 40 or 50 years ago, there wasn't a lot of that going around. So it's been a really beautiful program in that way. It's been both therapeutic, and it has enabled me to function as a chaplain and really hear people process some of the grief that has been long buried or long gestating.
So we've been talking a lot about dogs and cats. Can I just ask you a dumb question, which is, are most of the people that you care for with or concerned for pets that are dogs and cats, or are there other types of pets that come up often or that audience members might want to hear a bit more about?
Well, I can respond to that. I am actually one of the families that I just responded to lost a horse. And again, that's a domesticated animal as well, but we have a farm where I live, and one of the new areas I've been working in is just in our neighborhood, because people have all kinds of animals on their farm, horses, goats, chickens, cows, all kinds. And they bond with those animals really profoundly, especially the horses. And some of our neighbors recently had to put down a horse that they had had literally since he was born. He was born on their farm. They raised him. He started to have some significant health and behavioral problems where he was attacking other horses on their farm. And they had to make the very difficult decision to put him down. And it was just devastating. And so I would say any animal that has a bond relationship with humans, humans are going to be impacted when they lose them.
Working at a specialty hospital that has specialists in zoo med, otherwise known as exotics, I do see a lot. Excuse me, my pets are misbehaving. I'm so sorry. I will be back to respond to that in just a moment.
Take your time, no worries.
I would like to get back to a point that brought up, but we really didn't discuss, but it's the emotional needs of the veterinarians and the caregivers. We know that suicide is very high in the veterinary profession, and so self-care is important, but also I believe that like in a human hospital, as I have experienced, we supported the staff and their spiritual needs, and I think that's a need in animal hospitals as well. So I'd like to promote that idea.
I would like to agree with Dr. Gierka and expand on that to also animal shelters, because those of us in the animal shelter world, we lose, well, in my case, I work with cat shelters, but anyone who works in an animal shelter, there is a lot of loss and there are a lot of difficult decisions that we need to make in local parentis. So it's the same, I feel it's the same dilemma that people who are on the front lines in shelters, in veterinary offices, vet techs, really need that spiritual and emotional support. And I have been asked by a local animal shelter to do some pet chaplaincy work. And I'm excited about that because I know myself being in the field, how difficult it is and how many times I would come home crying from a cat that as a board member, I had to make a decision on, and I was there for the euthanization, and this happens, it's difficult.
We've got just a few more minutes, and there's a couple of topics we haven't gotten to. So let me put these questions out and you all can respond. Two different people are asking about whether you see connections between the work you do and the grief that people experience around ecological loss and devastation. One's coming from a theological educator, and another person says that she is a longtime wildlife campaigner and environmentalist and recently completed 4 units of CPE. And just wondering if you see connections here to eco-chaplaincy. Thoughts on that?
If you just look at what happened in Australia with the fires and how devastating that was to the responders and the people living in those areas, I mean, it's a huge issue. We just had a big tornado. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, but the tornado in Tennessee killed many people. And so, certainly environmental chaplaincy or eco-chaplaincy is a serious problem. In fact, I can tell you a quick story. When I, back in 2003, when I got the idea, or 2002, when I got the idea for Pet Chaplain, I originally started thinking about my own grief for some of the ecological devastation that's happening. And I remember being a chaplain at the time and asking my friend in church, I was attending a service, and I said, well, who does the chaplain go to when they experience the loss of environmental degradation, And at that time, I thought, well, no, people aren't going to understand earth chaplaincy. So, but maybe they'll understand pet chaplaincy. And that's really how it got started for me. But of course, that became very absorbing. But it's still, the question is, how do you respond to the environmental damages that you see happening?
Another question here. I provide grief support to veterans and their families. The relationships that veterans share with their service animals are often incredibly deep. Do you have any thoughts on this relationship? Particularly, do you have any rituals or tools that you would recommend to help veterans care for aging and dying service animals, while also allowing the veteran to face their own anticipatory grief?
I'll just quickly respond. I know everybody has some profound things, but as we see more and more types of service animals coming into use, people are having a stronger bond. And so the human-animal bond that Dr. Gierka was talking about becomes even more profound when that is not just a pet, a family member, but a vital part of you being able to function in your life in terms of a service animal. For veterans, that's often, they have dogs that are trained to help support them in their PTSD and work with that. So this is not then just an animal you love, which it is, but also a vital component of your care and being able to function in your life, which makes the potential loss so much more profound. And I also have responded, there are a lot more dogs working alongside us in our professions, certainly law enforcement that have dogs, military personnel, where dogs are a part, comrades, a part of their service. And when they are injured or die in the line of duty, or when they have to retire and look toward death, there's some tremendous grief issues to deal with that. We don't have time in this webinar to go into the details, but yes, I think that's where pet chaplains can come alongside in all of these situations and provide a framework and compassion and support. And the most important, just the acknowledgement that yes, this is a significant, that the animal is a significant part of your life. And the possibility of losing that animal or losing that animal creates grief, and you will have a tremendous amount of grief, and just to validate that and then be there to support them during that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that one too. I'm living in the Massachusetts area, and recently we had a very sad situation where a police officer and his companion service dog responded to a scene of violence, and the young officer unfortunately lost his life, and the dog was shot at, but the dog survived. And the outpouring of love and support and asking about the dog in the community was really incredibly bountiful. I mean, so many people care just as much about the service dog as they did about the officer. And I think that's really indicative of people learning and realizing the bond that these service dogs provide for the community, for the officers, and for people who need them. And then I think if you take that powerful bond and then transfer it to the question that was just asked, then you combine it with the fact that typically animals are going to have a shorter lifespan than us. So that whole other dynamic of somebody who's aging but knows that his service animal is aging quicker, I think is akin to a parent aging and maybe having a very, very sick child and knowing that child is going to die. And I think putting it on these terms that people can relate to and understand is really important for us as pet chaplains.
I'd also like to say that part of our work is showing that this is, to paraphrase Lin-Manuel Miranda, because we all love him, grief is grief is grief is grief. No one grief is greater than another, and we're trying to show that there's no comparison when it comes to grief. Your parent dying is the worst thing that's happened to you. Your pet dying is the worst thing that's happened to you. You losing your job is the worst thing that's happened to you. Your grief is yours, and there is no comparison that anyone else can make, because even if they've gone through the same thing, they have not lived your life. And I think that's another thing that we bring forward into that area, is the ability to take that breath and say, I am grieving, I am hurting, and I still need to be loved.
Yes. Yeah, recognizing that any loss is a permanent and irrevocable loss.
Mhm. Mhm. So there are a few more questions here we haven't gotten to. Michael or I are really happy to, if you email either of us, we're really happy to connect you who've been listening to any of the panelists so you can continue these conversations one-on-one. The last question I might just put forward on the list from someone who says that they're a house call vet and euthanasia is sadly a part of her practice. A question I get frequently and don't have an easy answer for is, do you think that other family pets should be present for or after the euthanasia? Do any of you have thoughts or suggestions about that question as we close?
My colleague in doing the work, so it's a team of 2, and my colleague is actually a DVM. And so pretty much what she says is it's a personal choice to whether or not to do that. If you feel that your pets need to sniff them and be aware that something's changing, then do that. If you don't feel that your pet can do it for whatever reason, behavioral, medical, then don't feel bad about taking that moment away and taking care of yourself. To this person, I would be happy to connect you with this veterinarian to discuss that one further from, you know, a DVM to DVM perspective.
And from a cat behaviorist perspective, the cat's going to realize, or the pet is going to realize, that his or her companion is gone. So to piggyback on what Kelly just said, it's a personal decision, but don't feel that you'll be doing something detrimental to your pet if that pet is not present.
Mhm.
And I would like to add that this is a call to show respect to our animals and to trust that the animal will and is able to make their own decision about being present or not. I have witnessed animals walk away from those situations, and I've witnessed other animals want to be close to those situations. And I fully trust that these animals know where it is they need to be for each other and for themselves.
Rob, do you want to have the last word here?
Oh,
Wait, you're muted.
I muted myself. I was unmuted. I just want to say thank you to these folks who have come, and to you, Wendy, and to Michael. You know, I have met the nicest people in this work, and I can't imagine doing work, any other kind of work, because people just are so loving and kind. So I just want to thank you for that, for being the wonderful, loving people you are.
Well, Rob, thanks for your leadership, and thanks to all of you for your time this afternoon. In about a week, this recording will be available, so please share it with friends and family. And again, we're really happy to connect people to panelists and others. The lab's next webinar will be on March 18th. It's about spiritual care and nature. And Alden Stoner and Aaron Robertson, who are the CEO and the Chief Program Officer of a foundation called Nature Sacred, will be talking with us. Nature Sacred has funded the building of a lot of chapels, meditation rooms, prayer rooms, and a whole bunch of settings across the country. And they're in the process of sort of rethinking their mission, and they've worked with a lot of chaplains. So they're just going to kind of think with us about their work, and I think it'll be really interesting. So if you're free, join us then or listen to the recording. And again, thank you to all of you for your time. We're really very grateful.
And thank you, Brandeis, for doing this work and expanding
Yes.
the idea of what chaplaincy can be.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.